How's going, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm back with another banger for you all. Huge shout out to Shadow Ace 117 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. It is the 27th century. The world has vastly changed. Humans can now operate machinery that can travel into space beyond the speed of light. With this, many colonies are formed on different planets. Resources are abundant and ripe for the taking. Huge ships are constructed with weapons strong enough to storm the gates of heaven itself. Humans have also grown up with war in their mindset. Even this vastly technologically advanced culture is no different. Many split into different factions. Parties and groups rise and fall until it was left to only two sides, the United Nations, which persevered with the promise of law, order, unity, and democracy, and the insurrectionists, commonly known as the rebels, who hoped and fought for change, power, and a new order. Humans were arrogant to think they were the only sentient beings in the vast universe, or even the galaxy. A collective race of aliens known as the Covenant found the humans residing on an outer colony known as Harvest. Ignoring all attempts of peaceful negotiations, they wiped the human colony and fleets despite tough resistance. The humans, uniting against this powerful enemy as the UNSC or United Nations Space Command, or the military arm of the United Earth Government, or UEG, were pushed back to their inner colonies with little hope. Fleets and armies were laid to waste, planets twice or three times the size of Earth glassed by the intense heat of the Covenant plasma bombardment procedure known as glassing. Soon, Earth itself was the last front. The main military installation of the UNSC, Reach, was overrun and abandoned. Then Halo revealed itself. A weapon of such great magnitude and power enough to wipe out all sentient beings within the galaxy. Both sides quickly took the front to pursuing these rings. Then, the control room of all Halos, known as the Ark, was revealed to be buried within Earth itself. The ensuing confrontation was devastating to both sides. Both almost had their leaders killed in action. Both took risks to gain it all. Both fought relentlessly. Then the flood reared its ugly head and started killing all that was within range. A parasitical species which had the capability to absorb mass and minds into a hive-like structure known as the Grey Mind. The Covenant splitting up, the destruction of the Arkansas. The elites siding with their former enemies. The loyalist Covenant remained scattering to the darkest edges of space. The humans endured and rebuilt, such as they always do. However, this human Covenant war taught them all a lesson usually ignored and forgotten: unite or die. With a fresh slate, they reunited themselves as the Terran Federation. Their military arm being the Terran Federation Navy, or the TFN. With their elite allies, they gained more technology than they ever dreamed. Ships being constructed on a grand scale. Everyone, including pacifists, agreed to acquire a fleet and army so strong, so that nothing like the human Covenant war would ever happen against with them on the losing side. Re-terraforming the glass planets, the humans expanded and became the strongest force in the galaxy with new technologies popping up every day. Of course, the humans weren't stupid or arrogant this time enough to think their galaxy was the only one. They kept patrols up around the edges of the galaxy while new colonies sprang up. The Terran Federation and the Elite Republic enjoyed a golden age. Valkyrie-class Super Destroyer, TFNS Guardian, Bridge, April 23, 2732. 0934 Standard Military Time. Spiral Arm 032 Beta Patrol Zone. A man stood at the helm of the bridge observing his crew. He was a wise man with much experience under his belt. More than most thought he had. He had been bored before the Human Covenant War and served under ONI during such. He piloted ships of varying sizes. He fought and destroyed ships of many kinds. Rebel and Covenant ships. He wore a standard-issue Navy uniform. He wore a hat denoting his rank, the highest a Navy officer could have. However, he had a dark past. Darker and shadier than even the ever-mysterious Office of Naval Intelligence. He lived back in a time where advanced technology meant grenades and projectile launchers. Fleet Admiral Naruto Uzumaki, commanding officer of the proud super destroyer TFNS Guardian, used to live in the time of swords and ninjas. The Elemental Nations was actually the ancient supercontinent of Pangaea. Humans wielded a unique inner energy called chakra as their main weapons. War and conflict was prevalent. These wars left scarred battlefields. So, when they clashed, their spent chakra should have recycled, such as the cycle of life. However, the surrounding environment was all but destroyed in these conflicts, and could not absorb the spent chakra energy. Energy could not be destroyed, so it lingered, forming relevant mass under the influence of war and malice. Thus, great beings of chakra, called the tailed beasts or biju, were formed and systematically killed and destroyed humans and their settlements, as upon their instinctual nature to kill. The humans countered this with sealing the massive entities with hosts, no more than 6 months old. Thus, Jinchuriki, or the power of human sacrifice, were born. They had immense potential as a weapon of mass destruction. Their role? Point to where the enemy was and watch the fireworks. One man, named Uchiha Madara, decided to collect all the powers of the tailed beasts, and turn himself into a true powerhouse, thus ending all conflicts by making everyone his slaves. One Naruto Uzumaki persevered through all this, and destroyed the man's plans along with Madara himself, and all of his accomplices. Despite being beaten and shunned by Konoha's ignorant villagers and ninjas, he decided to keep going and make a name for himself. His first solution was to be Hokage, but Danzo, being the Rokudame Hokage or sixth fire shadow, or the sixth leader of Konohagakure, made that a pipe dream at best. So, by ending the conflict, he saved what was left of his precious people and handed the torch of leadership from Danzo, who was conspiring against the hero of not only Konoha, but the hero of the elemental countries, Naruto himself, to Konohamaru, who promised to lead everyone into a golden age. For the most part, it came true. But, as with all things, war was a virus in the end, and consumed the hearts and morals of everyone in contact. Naruto Uzumaki was many things. A sage, a hero, an SSS-class shinobi, the first and only one, in fact, a fighter, a savior, a commander, an admiral, a leader, a Jinchuriki, a god, and lastly, a survivor. Fully absorbing the great mass of energy that was the Kyuubi and all the other tailed beasts made him cursed to live to forever, forbidden to see his comrades in heaven, or face his greatest enemies in hell. He knew the consequences of absorbing all the tailed beasts, but if that power were to be granted to someone else less forgiving. Therefore, he lived, he survived, he endured. Not even the systematic destruction of billions of stars at point-blank range would hurt him. And yet, reliving old memories would be enough to bring him to the brink of despair, as everyone he ever even remotely cared about moved on, never to be seen by him again. The situation eventually resolved itself. Chakra energy was dismissed as a myth and forgotten, though everyone, including soldiers, had it at civilian levels and could not utilize it, thus making it impossible to reform any more tailed beasts. In order to stave off boredom and insanity, he mastered every single branch of technology that existed, even contributed to society under different aliases. He was not concerned with taking credit, just making sure the job got done. He also wanted to avoid questions about his special immortality, and so here he was. One survivor, Naruto Uzumaki, Japanese in origin and fleet admiral of the TFN, performing a routine patrol mission. He drummed his fingers on the holographic pad, watching his, surprisingly, all-female bridge crew, working with an efficiency that would stun even the strictest of drill instructors, with an impassive eye. He personally trained this entire ship's crew. And since it was a fully staffed ship, unlike the skeleton crews on most ships, it was a great, impressive feat. ONI, back in its heyday during the Human Covenant War, had found out of his secret. But they too realized his potential. So in exchange for keeping it a secret to all but the highest in the chain of command, he would fight for humanity. Of course, he was still a somewhat fragile asset. An immortal being had no way to get back to another planet without a ship, so he was eventually given command of one of the few precious Marathon-class cruisers, the strongest ship the humans possessed at the time. The resulting victories in the name of humanity earned himself the nickname of the God of Maelstrom. ONI and Naruto's secret didn't exactly stay secret for long. Naruto averted his eyes and covered it with his hat as he blushed lightly. He actually had several religious communities worshipping him, despite his protests. Since the Human Covenant War ended, he had gotten bored again. Mastering any and all new technologies was getting quite boring. His pad was open to a section of NavSpecWeb that was declassified. The Spartan program, a breed of genetically enhanced super soldiers. Vital to the war effort, all the Spartans of the old 2 and 3 generation were listed as MIA. John 1:17, a Spartan 2 commando, the hero of the Human Covenant War, such as himself, Admiral Cole, and Lord Hood, was MIA as well. Being lost upon the aft section of the UNSC frigate Forward unto Dawn after a last-minute escape from the destruction of the Ark, Lord Hood, on his deathbed, made one last order, establishing the Hood Protocol. Like the Cole Protocol, disobeying it earned the death penalty. Alpha section was to destroy any remains of the Halo array and all flood-infested planets. Beta section was to rescue John 1:17 under any circumstances. Naruto decided to try his luck. It had never failed him before, so it wouldn't start now, right? Lieutenant Scatters. Generate a randomized vector as per the Cole Protocol. Our rounds are complete, so take us in about an hour in slip space, then we'll reorient ourselves and make best speed towards reach. Understood? Aye, sir. Randomized coordinates inputted. FTL drive at optimal status. The female navigation officer started to type at a faster pace. The sound of whirling plates told him the ship-borne AI already initiated the FTL sequence. The AI then popped up on his holographic pad. All systems normal, ready for transit, Admiral. Both the executive officer and the AI said this out loud at the same time. Thank you, Rear Admiral Mina, Tsukuyomi. He nodded his head at both of them. Rear Admiral Mina outlined Wilka was a great leader. She was compassionate towards her subordinates and valued teamwork over rivalry. She could be strict at times when needed, but she was always looking out for the best for everyone. However, she avoided her superiors like the plague and at times questioned their choices. If she had more motivation, she would have been a full admiral. She had red hair flowing down her shoulders and red eyes. She wore the standard Navy uniform, the white and yellow with gray and black stripes. Her shoulders and chest contained the insignia for Rear Admiral, lower class. Tsukuyomi, or Goddess of the Moon in Japanese, was his personal AI. She had seen him through many battles and was personally outfitted with the most advanced software and hardware made by himself personally, making her immortal in her own right. What was even more special about her was that Naruto had painstakingly made her from scratch, unlike through flash cloning someone's brain. She had a Japanese kimono with pinkish flower designs on a black background with a red sash. She had rich black hair in a bun with a few strands down the sides of her beautiful face, which held red eyes as well. A lone lily was in the right side of her hair near the top, giving her a natural look. He had his own neural interface, which allowed him to insert Tsukuyomi into his brain, so to speak, through a chip. This was used during offshore duties or even when he participated in ground combat. The God of Maelstrom was, famous for being a general who fought his own battles, though he wasn't a general. He waited patiently as the ship traveled at speeds faster than light. Suddenly the alerts on the bridge sounded off. The bridge crew, unprepared for such, acted on instinct. Status now. He barked out at the bridge crew, affectionately nicknamed the Bridge Bunnies. Sir. Looks like an anomaly with a black hole during transit. Normally, we wouldn't have a problem with this, but it looks like a black hole in slip space itself. Slip space was the most useful FTL travel. It bypassed planets, stars, and black holes by tearing another, usually clear path. The only conflict during slip space was the presence of other slip space using ships. The hell? Pull the ship out of slip space now. He roared at the navigation officer. Sir. Making it happen, sir. She proceeded to type at a furious pace. The ship started to groan. Sir. The ship's shields are too stressed. The ship is on a direct collision course with the black hole, and we can't adjust the heading. Rear Admiral Mina yelled out, reading the data on her station. Damn it. Turning the ship now would shear our ship in half. All right, bring the engines to full speed, bring us into the eye of that black hole. Admiral? Even the eye became nervous at this order. That wasn't a good sign for the Bridge Bunnies. We can't take the chance of destroying our ship in slip space. Nor can we afford to lose half of our ship in case the hull collapses on us while we're halfway in. If we're doing this, we have to give it 100% and push through. Everyone became reassured at this and started to carry out their orders. Inwardly, Naruto was worried. A black hole was nothing to scoff at, and one that was in slip space would become a big danger to anyone traveling this sector. Naruto wasn't worried for himself, but for his crew. They were hardworking and dedicated. They were his family. Dysfunctional at times, but family nonetheless. The ship shook and shuddered as it presumably entered the special black hole. He was confident they would survive the transition with the ship intact thanks to the shields, but since they had no way to predict where they were going, they couldn't go back to where they were, or even to reach or any known TF or ER space. The computer knew the destination, but since they didn't know where they were currently at, they couldn't make a correct course. Lieutenant Scatters reported that they were clear of the exit black hole, known as a white hole, and they were out of slip space. Naruto ordered for all sensors to be active. He wanted to know where they were dumped at, and if there was any hostiles in the area. Sir. Looks clean around this area. But it looks like we're getting a reading from a nearby planet. Breathable atmosphere and giving off a strange reading. Mina reported. Any of the energy signatures match any known TFN, ERN, Halo, or Flood installations? None, sir. Well, they are actually giving a similar signature to yourself. Mina turned around in her station and looked at him. Naruto paused at this. No way. I didn't get to this position by giving myself false hope, but if it's true, alright, we'll investigate this source. I want all scanners up and trying to find out where the hell are we at. I also want the 51st and 79th Marine Battalions on standby. Prep the 501st ODSTs for launch. Aye, sir. Getting underway. The ship started to move while releasing its protective armor around the observational areas. The planet in question gave of a strangely blue aura. Wisps of greenish blue floated around the atmosphere. All right, ladies, it's our cue now. Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto Mio barked out to the members of the 501st ODST squad. She was a fiercely independent warrior, led a life fully by a warrior code not dissimilar to the samurai traditions of ancient feudal Japan. She even carried a steel-black katana on her back. She had black hair tied into a ponytail, and had brown eyes full of experience. Currently, she wore the standard marine underarmor, an army green shirt with cargo pants. Strangely enough, this squad was all-female as well. Normally, military regulations wouldn't allow for such a situation, but they were all veterans and were handpicked and trained by Naruto himself. Rather unwillingly. The brass back on Earth and Reach wanted him to relax a bit, but all their efforts were rebutted when Naruto made every effort to stay active in many ways. Unfortunately for the brass, this also included pranks. So instead they made him train the 501st ODSTs and place them as his personal bodyguards. It seemed that when the TFNS Guardian set out for duty with 2 admirals on board, that protocol seemed to hold no place on board. Is Admiral Uzumaki joining us on this drop, Lieutenant Colonel? Asked Major Erica Stormtrooper Hartmann. She had a reputation for always being on point and first in, last out on the battlefield. She also, unfortunately, was very lazy off-duty to the point where she would consider lifting her finger too much of an effort. Regardless, she was a very competent soldier. She had short gold blonde hair and beautiful indigo eyes. She wore a black undershirt and white shorts. She was currently changing out of them. Yes. It also seems that Mina will be joining us. Oh? It seems like the 501st is truly back together then. Major Charlotte Shirley Yeager was excited. She was a freedom-loving and fiercely independent girl. She was armed lightly and took down hostiles quickly. She had orange hair and sky-blue eyes. She was changing out her own army green shirt and cargo pants. Yeah, can't wait to fight with Mina again, said Major Gertrude Trude Barkhorn. She was the resident heavy weapons specialist and usually carried the squad support machine gun. She also carried most of the extra ammunition. She had reddish-brown hair and hazel eyes that told many a story. She wore the standard Marine uniform that was black with gold buttons, complete with the cap. Hope this mission will be a more exciting one than the ones we have been having. I have cramps on my legs from sitting around too long, said Chief Warrant Officer Francesca Lucchini. She was always hyperactive and never wanted to sit around too long. She usually got up close and personal real quickly with any hostiles and dispatched them easily. She was also the best person suited for distraction. Teamed up with the quick-killing Shirley, made these two a devastatingly effective decoy party. She was the shortest of the group and had a mop of dark green hair and lighter green eyes. She was lethargically changing out of her white undershirt and green khakis. You shouldn't be asking for things that could come true. I, for one, hope this mission is easy, admonished Captain Isla Ilmatar Jutilinen. She had an amazing record for coming into battle and leaving the field without a scratch on her. She had a brownish-gray hair with a dull violet color for eyes. She had a black t-shirt with white shorts. You should lighten up a bit more, Isla, remarked her longtime partner Captain Sonia V. Lidviak. She usually hefted a rocket launcher for anti-tank duties. Her also had a silenced submachine gun for night patrol duties. She had an acute sense with her natural night vision and hearing. She blue-gray hair and deceivingly innocent emerald eyes. They seemed to glow with power. She was changing out of her gray t-shirt and gray shorts. Near the last pair of human entry vehicles, HEVs, the latest additions to 501st were talking. Ready for the mission, Yoshika-chan? Asked a concerned Lieutenant Lynette Lynn Bishop. She was the long-range marksman of the group and hefted a heavily customized sniper rifle onto her HEV pod. She was a brunette, and had blue eyes to complement such. She was already dressed in the standard combat underarmor, shaded a steel black. Locking the sniper rifle in place, she turned to the one she addressed, Warrant Officer Maya Fujiyoshika. She raised an assault rifle into her own HEV pod and locked it into place, making sure the impact for when the HEV hit the dirt, it wouldn't jar the door into a compromising position. The addressed warrant officer had unruly brown hair just below military regulations. She also had rather innocent hazel eyes. She too was in her underarmor. No worries, we'll be fine. Just anxious about this mission is all. This was her first combat mission on the ground after all. She was extensively trained by Naruto and the rest of her squad. She was the squad's field medic or corpsman. The only thing keeping her from rising to lieutenant like her best friend Lin was her lack of field experience. However, like they say, field experience is something you lack when you really need it. Hey! If you two are done chatting around, the two admirals are about to brief us in the mission room, yelled Captain Perrine, Klosterman. She was a fairly recent addition to the 501st as well. Showing a not-too-subtle adoration of Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto, she was a proud lady, hailing from a noble family from France back on Earth. She possessed blonde hair along with yellowish eyes to complete the combo. This was contrasted by the standard black finish of the underarmor. She had already placed her own assault rifle away and was near the exit of the room where everyone else had already gone through. Yes, sir! The two girls hastily replied and followed the captain to the mission room. As Naruto and Mina waited in the mission room for the 501st ODST squad to show up, he mused over the situation. Though everyone from the Terran Federation only had civilian levels of chakra, it did not mean they were not trained in the use of its separate components, mana and chi. Mana was the spiritual part of chakra and could be trained in its use by experience and overall use. Chi was the physical part of chakra and was trained by physical means, training or augments. Because of this discovery made by one of Naruto's reinforced clones in Henge, he revealed to the public the means to which and how mana and chi could be used. What followed next was an explosion of people trying to contact him for personal training. Now, that isn't to say that every civilian could fire off a shit-killing fireball from their mouths. But every soldier could now utilize these special attacks to augment and support their individual strength. Also, because of the usage of such energies, the life expectancy of humans was doubled to 200 years old. Even with these trainings, energy could not be expelled off of a planet naturally, both due to the law of physics and relativity, but also because of practicality. It wouldn't do for every spacefaring being in the galaxy to be attracted to the energy the planet was giving off like a moth to a flame. Except this flame couldn't defend itself from the hordes of the moths that would come after it. He shifted his thoughts to the only other person in the room as that very person started to hum a song in boredom. Rear Admiral Minna was a good friend of his. During the Covenant War, her planet was under siege by the Covenant. Back then, it was puzzling as to why the Covenant would even bother. Her home colony of Sigma Octanus IV was no valuable resources to use and held 17 million people. The then Commander Keyes performed his famous Keyes loop. During the second battle for Sigma Octanus IV, Naruto, along with the newly promoted Captain Keyes, defended Sigma Octanus IV yet again. Sigma Octanus IV was invaded and eventually abandoned. It was located in a sector that would require the UNSC fleets to spread even thinner. Naruto had personally flew down to the planet during the evacuation and spotted her, along with her two friends, Erika Hartmann and Gertrude Barkhorn, at 5 years old, looking for their parents. Naruto pulled up their records and found that their parents were part of the reserve guard of a major population center, Côte d'Azur, of Sigma Octanus IV. The very major population center that was invaded and exterminated of all humans very recently. Naruto sympathized with them, mainly because he was an orphan as well, way back on Konohagakure. He took them in his ship and gave them the necessities. He made best speed for Earth, instead of reach, and deposited the refugees along with the 3 girls there, but not without giving them a motivational speech which led to them joining the Air Force. They landed themselves onto the seat of the experimental Saber air superiority fighter at only 13 years old. They each scored over 200 kills in their fight against the Covenant. During the first battle for Earth, they found Naruto commanding the last surviving Marathon-class cruiser, the UNSC Riding Shotgun. At that time, the cruiser had her flak and seaweeds batteries offline and came under heavy fire from Covenant Seraph fighters and ground attack Banshees. They managed to drive off the Covenant attack on Naruto's ship and requested to join his roster. At the same time, the rest of what was to become the 501st came as surviving reinforcements from the rest of the inner colonies. Initially, they were to have 50 ships of varying powers to come to the aid of Earth, but ended up within the crosshairs of the Covenant battle group. Sakamoto Mio and Mayafuji Yoshika, who at the time was a civilian, came from Reach. Sonya and Ayla, as well as Lucchini and Shirley, were longsword combat pilots for a destroyer that was destroyed during the fight for Earth. Lynette and Parian assisted his ship when their orbital defense platform Athens was destroyed by a Covenant bomb. They all came to the damaged Riding Shotgun and protected it with their amazing and unique skills. After the war, they had all went their separate ways. But the uprising threats from the newly resurrected insurrectionists prompted them to re-enlist. Fortunately, the conflict was resolved without the use of force. The only source of conflict was the minor border skirmishes with the migrating Loyalist Covenant. They never faced the UNSC, or rather, the newly renamed Tifen, in a straight-up fight, and air-to-air combat became virtually non-existent. So, the girls decided to re-enlist as Marines, only when the brass found them and their skills to be redeployed as the 501st ODST Squadron under one Admiral Naruto Uzumaki. During one of their missions, Minna was extensively injured, with Naruto having to personally interfere with the Loyalists' plan to kill the ODSTs. Minna made a full recovery and was promoted to Rear Admiral. Though she was an Air Force personnel at first, she became a Marine, then a trooper, and finally a Navy pencil pusher. She did not slack up on her skills though, and still made for a good fighter to defend both herself and Naruto. Naruto vehemently protested the need for protection, stating their skills should be used somewhere more useful than patrol missions. The brass countered by stating that all conflict only exists on patrol missions these days. And thus, here they were. The crew of Guardian and even the 501st themselves kept teasing Minna on how good of a pair Naruto and her was, prompting a furious blush from Minna along with a fierce denial, while Naruto just raised an eyebrow whenever he was within hearing range, which actually was quite large thanks to the absorption of the Biju. He mentally shook his head when he realized he had been staring at Minna for quite some time. Luckily for him, she had not been aware and kept humming her song, which he idly noted was not the same song when he started to mull over the situation. Just in time as well, since the members of the 501st started to file in. "All right, ladies, here's the situation," he stated in a loud voice so as to get the attention of everyone. He then pointed to the holographical representation of the Guardian. "We exited the black hole anomaly and came upon unknown space. None of the astronomical charts are matching up, so everything is an unknown right now. We have no intel and no coordinates, which means no way of getting back home for now." Minna then spoke up. "We found a planet with breathable atmosphere giving off a peculiar reading, similar to that of Admiral Uzumaki's own energy. We are to investigate this source of energy. Rose, rules of engagement, are to hold fire until permission is granted. Are we clear, girls?" "Crystal, ma'am," the 501st stated proudly. "Good, be prepared to drop at 1017. Naruto dismissed everyone and went to the dropping room, affectionately known as the Hell's Meeting Area. He started to fit his equipment into his unmarked drop pod. He heard someone step in front of the pod to the right of his own. He smelt a scent familiar to him all these years. "What are you expecting, Naruto?" Minna started to equip her own pod. They were still 15 minutes early, but they both had a habit of double-checking everything in place. "Not sure, I've faced a lot of stuff in my time and my instincts are going off the charts." "Anxious?" "More like anticipation. For what we find, or for excitement?" "A bit of both." Naruto gave his pod another glance before moving to the observation area. Minna followed him. They both looked at the planet, which was still giving off the strange energy, not unlike the aurora light show that many planets naturally produced. But these lights was a concentrated energy, rather than just light. After a few minutes of silence, Naruto sighed and he turned to exit the room when Minna blocked his way. "You know you can talk to me about anything. We've all been together for too long to keep secrets." Naruto just looked at her, contemplating. Maybe after the mission. No need to confirm something, and my gut tells me that something on this planet may be that key." Naruto and Minna enter the dropping area, where the other members are suiting up in their Trident battle armor. With newly acquired technology from the elite's shields, battle armor possessed shields on all personnel, even Navy personnel and civilians, though they had a basic shielding system. Marines, Army regulars and Reserve Guard have the spearhead, flanker, and crisis battle armor respectively. They were easy to produce in field and were very reliable and effective. They possessed basic physical and neural augments, and had a 2x overshield, which was effectively 2 times the shielding of civilians and Navy personnel. ODSTs had their Trident armor, which had advanced augments for physical, neural, and energy. It was about twice as expensive as the aforementioned armors and thus given to the elite troopers of the TFN. It had a more efficient reactor, enabling the troopers to have a 3x overshield. The Spartans, who had their programs reinitialized, had the Mjolnir Mark X armor. It was very advanced and was made from cutting-edge technology along with the ability to possess active camouflage, holograms, armor locking, drop shielding, and held a 4x overshield. This armor was also given to all personnel of 7th officer rank, or higher, which translated into Brigadier General for the Army, Reserve, and Marines, and Rear Admiral for the Navy. Naruto pulled a data chip from the holographic pod which contained Tsukuyomi, and inserted the chip into the slot in the back of his head. As Tsukuyomi adjusted herself with his neural implants and Mjolnir armor, he stepped within his pod as did everyone else. There was no further need for words. Everyone and everything was already set. As the 501st Squad Plus 2 dropped into low atmosphere, Naruto gazed into the space outside his HEV. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, as they say. The pod shook and shuddered one last time as it impacted with the ground. Even with the reverse thrusters, impact absorbers, and anti-gravity modules on board and with his Mjolnir armor's own safety systems, he still heavily felt the impact as if he fell that same distance naked. He groggily pushed the door outwards while retrieving his LAR-416 rifle and his LPT-45 personal sidearm. He also retrieved the rest of his grenades and checked his suit. He radioed the Guardian that they had a successful drop. The Guardian did not need its CO, commanding officer, XO, executive officer, or even its AI, artificial intelligence, to operate. The bridge bunnies were more than enough. Though they could not fly anywhere with permission without the CO or XO, and they couldn't fly as smoothly or acquire targets as fast with an AI, they only need a few bridge bunnies to keep the ship in geosynchronous orbit over the planet. The 501st were the first to recover after him, since they already were adjusted to the harsh, but expected drops that the ODSTs were used to. Minna was last. Despite having served a solid 2 years as a ODST herself, she was the most unused to dropping in from such an elevation, Naruto notwithstanding. They secured their position as pelicans from the Guardian flew in and picked up their spent HEVs to be refueled and reused. They had landed in a clearing surrounded by rather tall trees. They made their way north, though there was really no sure way to guarantee to where to go, or even what to find. Naruto made it an objective to find a hint of civilization closest by. Naruto suddenly sensed the approach of several high-level energy sources coming in fast. He opened a squad channel on his TACCOM. Approximate 7 fast movers. Bearing down on us, elevation 10 feet. Set up and do not engage. Understood. Everyone tensed as 7 figures dropped from the trees surrounding them. Halt! We need to take all of you in for questioning about that source of meteors, said one of the figures. 3 of the figures were wearing ANBU masks depicting a few animals. But Naruto's real attention were on the 4 unmasked figures. There, who was the one who spoke, was the Yandame Hokage of Konohagakure, Namikaze Minato himself. Along with the younger versions of Tsunade Senju, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru of the Sannin. Naruto froze. Nothing short of a miraculous intervention could have prepared him for seeing what was in front of him right now. Everyone suddenly stood in shock and surprise as Naruto accidentally spoke a word through an external radio inside his suit. Ota-san? Hi no Kuni, Konohagakure, Hokage Tower. June 24, 1047 AFS. After First Shinobi 1:47 p.m. Unknown sector, unknown galaxy, coordinates unknown. Minato Namikaze sighed. Though he was leader of the strongest military base in the Land of Fire, the name didn't mean much as of currently. Konohagakure, or the village hidden in the leaves, was recently attacked by the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The demon was released from its previous host, Kushina Uzumaki, while birthing her and his daughter Kasumi Uzumaki. The demon was not alone, as a strange and impossibly old man named Madara Uchiha took control of it with his special Sharingan, or copy wheel eye. Stupid genetics. He proceeded to trash Konoha using the Kyuubi as his wrecking ball. Escaping himself as if knowing the outcome. Minato, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Jiraiya, Tsunade Senju, Orochimaru, combined with Uzumaki Fuinjutsu or sealing techniques from a barely conscious Kushina, had made it possible to seal the entirety of the Kyuubi's power within Kasumi without the need for calling upon the Shinigami or Death God for help. The villagers of Konoha were out for blood after losing so much. Specifically Kasumi's blood. But they weren't stupid enough to go against their beloved Hokage, who played a big role in saving the rest of their lives in the first place. Nor were they particularly thrilled about having to push through 5 of the strongest shinobi Konohagakure had to offer, or the clan heads, who owed a lot to the Namikaze and Uzumaki families, or the ANBU, who were nearly fanatical in their devotion of the Yandame. We're getting off topic. Point is that Kasumi Uzumaki Namikaze grew up loved but not spoiled and knew a rather harsh life, being glared and ignored by the very villagers she had inadvertently saved at birth. Minato sighed once more as he took a drink out of his hidden sake stash. Kushina usually went on a rampage whenever he drank, but with the current events and circumstances, even she joined in it a little. He contemplated what would happen if he were not alive to protect his daughter. She would have grown up knowing a mother's love though, right? He shook away the depressing thoughts, and throwing out the empty sake bottle, he got back to finishing paperwork. Now, knowing that most of the civilians and civilian council were against his decision to let the Jinchuriki live, even if she were his daughter, he had to be much more cautious in signing away slips of paper. As he made his way through the stack, an ANBU burst through the doorway, scattering his hard-worked paperwork with the unfinished ones. He glared immensely at the unwelcome intruder, as he sweated at the implications of what he had done. Sorry Hokage-sama. But we have spotted a number of meteors heading towards a clearing around 2 miles southeast of here. Konoha's yellow flash, or Konoha no Kuroi Senko, turned to look outside his window outside his desk. Conveniently, it was positioned at just the right angle to see what looked like 12 black rocks falling in perfect formation with long red streaks of flame ripping through the sky at a fast pace. He mused over the situation. The last time a meteor made contact with the Earth was when a group of people settled around it, enhancing their chakra and fighting powers. He was more concerned, however, about what would happen if another village were to get its hands on such power. Alright, good work. I need you to deliver a message to Jiraiya, Tsunade, Orochimaru, Kushina, Kakashi, and Itachi to need me at the south gate. I also need 2 groups of 4 ANBU also be ready at the south gate. Jiraiya's usually at the hot springs by this time, so go. Minato donned his battle gear as the ANBU used a Shunshin no Jutsu in order to carry out his tasks. Not too long after Sarutobi entered the room. You going after those rocks dropping from the sky? The professor inquired. Yeah, sorry old man, but I'll need you to take over for a bit. No worries, just make sure to get back safely. Hiruzen ignored the old man jibe and nodded as Minato jumped out the window to the south gate. Better get back safely. I don't want to this accursed paperwork for more than an hour at best, thought the so-called god of shinobi as he sullenly glared at the messed-up stack of paperwork. Kakashi, Itachi, and Kushina donned their current/old ANBU masks. Kushina had left Kasumi with Mikoto Uchiha, who had been having a friendly conversation with Kushina before the ANBU gave her the message. He told the 2 squads of ANBU to flank them slightly behind to make a V formation. He nodded and they all departed in direction where the meteors would come into contact with the ground. If one were to look at the sky now, it would look like 12 fingers ripping their way through the blue sky, slowly turning the stars into a faded black smoke. The group of 15 made their way on foot as quickly as they could towards the clearing. They stopped and held their ground about halfway there as the 12 meteors impacted the ground with a great force. They all resorted to using chakra to keep their feet planted. As soon as it was clear, Itachi noted a few more objects coming down to the site of the impact. Pointing it out, it seemed like 12 more meteors, but that idea was tossed away as they did not have the streaks of fire trailing them and their speed was considerably less. They stopped in shock and awe and they got closer as it seemed to be flying metal, which picked up the supposed meteors back into the sky. They were knocked out of their stupor as soon as the flying pieces of metal disappeared behind some clouds and continued on their way to the impact zone, wondering what the fuck was going on. They took to the trees for faster movement about 3/4 of the way there in order to observe the impact site before anyone else got there. Itachi, using his Sharingan, told Minato that there were 12 unrecognizable and rather large signatures making their way north of the impact site towards their direction. And so, here they were. Halt! We need to take all of you in for questioning about that source of meteors, Minato said in a commanding voice, perturbed at the figures before them. All of them wore a clean finished black body armor that encompassed them from head to toe. 9 out of the armored figures had a dark navy blue T-shaped visor where their head would be. Their armor was very imposing and intimidating. They seemed to be holding up some L-shaped weapons of various sizes with the long end pointing at them. At this everyone in the group tensed. Everyone on his side held out kunais and shurikens and prepared for a fight. Even though they had the numerical advantage, they had no idea what type of damage these armored figures could inflict, or even if those meteors and flying contraptions of metal had weapons and more troops of their own. 2 of the armored beings seemed to have armor of a different model. It seemed to have more torso armor than the upper chest armor the other 9 had. Streaks of red were painted across the sides and shoulders of the armor. Their visors were colored a dark gold, and was more like a mask as it occupied the whole front side of the helmet in comparison to the T-shaped ones of the other 9. It looked like these 2 were the leaders of these strange and well-armed people. More technology than them, that's for sure. Everyone seemed to freeze as one of those 2 leaders seemed to slip out a hesitant voice laced with anxiety and hope. "Oh-to-san?" Naruto bit his tongue and winced. Though he didn't outwardly reveal anything, he mentally cursed himself for his stupidity. He ignored the requesting comm channels from the troopers as he stared down one of the most influential shinobis of his time. Motherfuck! He brought his weapon to bear as he averted his eyes, though no one could tell as his helmet was completely still. He took in glances of the other 3 unmasked shinobis and Kunoichi. He stifled down feelings of regret and sadness as he saw Jiraiya and Tsunade and well as crushed the feelings of anger and hatred as he saw Orochimaru. It's clear this isn't the same reality as our old one. Orochimaru wasn't here by this time since I'm still feeling the lingering power of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The implications were staggering. His shoulders relaxed themselves on accident as he fully realized that his old home was back in its era in this reality. Though with a few notable changes. It seemed as if the squad of troopers around him have gotten worried as Minna talked to him on her own external radio. Sir? This sudden break of silence seemed to knock the people on the other side of the clearing. One of the people on the other side, who seemed to be the leader with his extravagant robes of flames and suspiciously bared a resemblance to their own admiral, addressed them once more. You referring to me? Sorry, but I already have a kid back home and you're definitely not her. Everyone resumed their tense stance as he took a single step forward. He noticed this and pulled out his special kunai for the Hiraishin no Jutsu, or the Flying Thunder God technique. Just as a precautionary in case they decided to start something no one would like to start. Everyone froze for a second time as the same man started to laugh and hollow laugh. One that sent chills down everyone's spine, including the hidden ANBU squad still in the trees. Her? A daughter, you say? Then we're definitely in a foobar situation. He stopped laughing, but his shoulders still shook as if he was trying to hold it back in. Naruto pulled then off his helmet. Usually this was not advised when in vacuum of space or on a planet with a hostile environment, or non-breathable atmosphere. But since it was breathable, and since his shields still naturally conform around his head like a second skin, it was technically okay by the military rulebooks to do so. Minato-sama/sensei/senpai/kun? Breathed out everyone but Minato himself when they saw his face under the helmet. The last being Kushina. Was that a blush? He seemed to be a somewhat younger version of Minato, but without the long bangs on the side of his face. In fact, his face was devoid of any hair other than on top of his head, which was unruly but flat. He possessed faded cerulean blue eyes, not unlike his daughter's own ones. Unlike hers, however, his told of experience that could shake even the strongest of wills to their knees. All in all, he seemed like a weary young warrior, a frightening implication if his rather pale complexion was anything to go by. Like a man on a journey returning back to a brand new home when he was told quite a while back that his old home was completely destroyed. Name's Naruto Uzumaki. Fleet Admiral of the Terran Federation Navy and Commanding Officer of the TFNS Guardian. It's a pleasure. It seems like everyone being frozen in shock was a trend these days. Jiraiya looked over to Minato, who was just as surprised as him and Kushina. Wasn't Naruto the name you were going to give to your child if he were a boy? He had forgotten in his shock that there were others who could hear him. Though it wasn't exactly sensitive information, everyone in that clearing started to connect the dots by themselves. Minato suddenly threw his kunai at the lookalike and flashed over to him when it was 2 inches next to his head. Grabbing and twirling the kunai until it was in a reverse grip with the side towards his exposed neck, he was most certainly not amused. I don't know who the hell you think you are, but posing as my own son that I didn't even give birth to is simply dash. He was forced to stop as a weapon calmly rested against his head. And I don't know who you are, Minato-san, but pointing weapons at our leader shouldn't do well for your life expectancy. Minna wasn't amused either. Minato suddenly remembered the presence of the other 11 armored beings and sheepishly turned his head slowly to find 10 more weapons point at him. The situation was rapidly degenerating, and right before it could turn into an all-out battle royal. Stand down, Minna, sir, with all due respect dash. Minna was taken aback by Naruto's mere dismissal of the weapon at his neck. Stow it, Rear Admiral, hostler your weapon. Minna reluctantly holstered her pistol after a few moments, but stood close by. She reassured herself slightly by reminding herself that he did have one of the most advanced shielding systems active. Sir, this man is threatening your life with a weapon fully poised to carry it out. Permission to open fire dash. Negative, Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto, stand by. Everyone was befuddled at the turn of events. Everyone but Naruto, that is. He turned around, fully ignoring the kunai, towards the shell-shocked, once more, Minato, and asked as if he hadn't a care in the world. So, can we get some ramen? What the fuck? Was the collective and majority of thoughts streaming through everyone's head right now. Naruto, his squad, still fully outfitted with armor and weapons, and the 7 people who confronted them, namely Minato, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Orochimaru, and unknowingly, Kushina, Itachi, and Kakashi, were all sitting at a nondescript restaurant bar. Naruto was on his second bowl while everyone was still freaked out by his nonchalance to such a situation. A situation that no one could have predicted they were in for. Naruto had to immensely hold back his temptation for scarfing down as many bowls of fresh, not the best, but still good, ramen. He never did get any of them back in the UNSC, nor had much time as he was filing paperwork as a fleet admiral in the T-Fin. He had to set a polite tone in order to get through this without any more complications. As he set aside the last empty bowl as of right now, he remembered the rather awkward stride through the forest back to Konoha as everyone was still on guard. Minato shooting some wary glances at Mina, who was anxiously fingering her pistol. The girls were matching in a protection box formation with Naruto at its center. The others had moved up front and were not happy nor particularly feeling safe turning their backs on such a well-coordinated and well-trained squad that looked like it can take down armies on a whim. The 2 squads of A and B that were in hiding, they had motion trackers installed on their suits, so Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto immediately confronted them about it, had split up. One protecting the entrances and exits to the restaurant, while the other stayed up top on the roof, ready to provide assistance at a moment's notice. So, I suppose I should start my tale first, no? Naruto inquired as he immediately got the attention of everyone within the restaurant. It was closed down, with the exception of the owner and chef, who too were listening in. I guess, let's start out with who are your squad and why are you here? Minato was still wary of Mina and the rest of potential threats within the walls of his village. Naruto smiled a chilling smile. I do believe that we are the guests here, and as such, are not the ones being interrogated. Why yes. My apologies, but I lead this village and would appreciate it if you could tell your men women. Mina grounded out. Women to put down their weapons. Minato was anxious and playing out a scenario in his head if a confrontation ensued within the restaurant. They are as nervous and curious as you are, Hokage-san. But if you can launch attacks on my person or on those under my care with just a few hand signs, why should I purposefully disarm my own subordinates? Minato mentally cursed as the armored figures suddenly tensed at this new revelation. All right then. Now your tale? Naruto smiled and told his story. It was not a short story, nor one for the faint of heart. He told them of a young boy who grew up unjustifiably prejudiced and beaten in a village full of humans who were afraid of the unknown. He told them of his achievements, defeating a crazy man, ending conflicts with a single kill, absorbing great masses of chakra known as the Biju. How the boy matured into a weathered man who lived through it all. He did not yet tell them of precious few events of great importance. Not everyone was meant to know of the future. Then he told his tale of the world. How machines and man could now navigate into the great beyond of space. How new planets were colonized and the human race expanded. How the wars between humans left them scarred. Then his tale of the Covenant and the Human Covenant War. Billions dead. Armies and fleets swept aside in the unrelenting onslaught of the aliens' might and superior technology. Then the Forerunners, Halo, and the Flood. Their role in the galaxy. And how one man, someone greater than simply a mortal, saw it all. His name was Naruto Uzumaki, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki in another reality. Naruto basked in the looks of complete shock and disbelief. So you think entering black holes sent us back in time, sir? Mina was the first to recover from the shock of his secret let out. Granted, it was at least 2 or 3 minutes of utter silence. No. I believe it sent us into a parallel dimension of some sort. Black holes don't just appear in slip space. That theory of parallel dimensions made back on Earth quite a few years back, commented Major Gertrude. She was up to date on many sciences and theories when signing up for the Marines. She was almost too dedicated. Naruto sheepishly averted his eyes. The same person who made that theory was one of his clones in a henge. However, when the clone dispelled, he found out that he was heavily intoxicated well above 0.5 BAC, blood alcohol content, with his immunity working to stop his appearance of appearing as a haggard drunk when he made that particular announcement. The same announcement that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. Again. So, you're saying that you're our son from another dimension then? Minato let out a long sigh and asked the chef to whip out some bottles of sake. He had a good feeling that the hangover wouldn't be as bad as the headache he felt creeping on. He also made a hand sign for the other three to take off their masks. His story was so far-fetched that it had to be true. Reverse psychology, learn it kids. Naruto impassively watched as they took off their masks. He already had an inkling of who they were when Minato allowed them to sit in on this conversation. Normal A and BU typically wouldn't be involved with such affairs. So, what do you plan on doing now? It seems as if you cannot go back to the TFN, was it? Jiraiya asked as he wondered. Now knowing his background, everyone from Konoha felt as if they could relax around him at least. No use of a godlike being blowing up his slightly altered planet when he could change a lot of stuff this time, right? Well, I have a proposal regarding that. But with you knowing my old history, could you tell me to what extent is different back here? Minato nodded. Well, the casualties from the attack of this Madara Uchiha and the Kyuubi no Yoko are pretty much the same, with the exception of myself and Kushina here. Orochimaru hasn't defected, though I wonder why he did in the first place. Finally, Jiraiya is maintaining his intelligence network from afar, with Tsunade not leaving the village. Orochimaru was looked at with suspicion until Naruto intervened. It seems like a great number of changes have been made. I bear no hard feelings to anyone here, so you all should not as well. He didn't defect, and that is fact. Orochimaru nodded at him gratefully. So, your proposal then? Tsunade inquired. She then took a gulp of sake from the dishes that were placed out in front of them, as many imitated her, and did likewise. Well, I would like everyone under my charge to have free roam in this world. No sense in keeping them locked up out there from threats that don't really matter if they really want to. No one here, including myself, will be bound to any village, or organization for that matter. Our loyalty will remain with the TFN, and so we will protect as many humans as we can, as it should be. Naruto noticed that Minato and Jiraiya looked slightly sad at this, but he continued on. The soldiers and anyone else who comes down here will always have the option to come back to the ship for any reason. They will also be under my command at all times, so if I issued a declaration of war, or an evacuation notice for any reason, they will obey it. They can take any mission if they want to, but I, nor the TFN will take any blame for such. They are proud men and women of the Terran Federation, they know how to handle themselves. Naruto finished up as his squad, and those of Konoha nodded in agreement. Tsukuyumi, Naruto's personal smart AI, has also taken the liberty to turn the TACCOM on an open channel, so he wouldn't have to repeat his story back to the people on board his ship. The interior guardians started to come alive with buzzing and conversations, mainly relating to the history of their commanding officer and the new options before them. So, after everything now, I believe my subordinates should finally make their introductions. He nodded his head at the 501st ODST squad and Mina as they stood up in crisp military salutes to Naruto. Yes, sir! They shouted out in unison. Everyone else stared in awe on their loyalty, dedication, and unity in which they emanated. Mina first removed her helmet, placing it on the table as she made her own introduction. Rear Admiral Minadiet lined Wilka. Former 501st ODST squad leader. Executive Officer of the TFNS Guardian, Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto Mio. 501st ODST Squad Leader, Major Gertrude Barkhorn. 501st Squad Second in Command, Major Erika Hartmann. 501st Squad Assault Specialist, Major Charlotte E. Yeager. 501st Squad, Team Foxtrot, Chief Warrant Officer Francesca Lucchini. 501st Squad, Team Foxtrot, Assault Specialist, Captain Pierrette Henriette Klosterman. 501st Squadron, Captain Isla Ilmatar Jutilinen. 501st Squad, Team Nightwing, Captain Sonia V. Lidviak. 501st Squad, Team Nightwing, Anti-Armor Specialist, Lieutenant Lynette Bishop. 501st Squad, Designated Marksman, Warrant Officer Maya Fuji Yoshika. 501st Squadron. Within a squad, especially one as big as this one, it is usually split up into groups of 2 or 3, the main body, consisting of its leader sometimes, its second-in-command and any new recruits. The teams are given clearly identifiable names and split up with it being modular as possible, being as small or as large as the leader or superior officer wants it. In the 501st, Team Foxtrot is the main distraction and delay force. It is also very mobile and is regularly used to outflank an enemy, then withdraw after delivering a thrust, for the others to exploit. Team Nightwing acquaints itself with nighttime duties such as patrol and reconnaissance. Since it's the team with the only anti-armor capability, it usually branches off from the main attack force to prioritize enemy armored units. The shinobi and kunoichi are impressed by their show of protocol. As they re-equip their helmets, Minato asks them, "We don't recognize your ranking systems, so I doubt the civilian council is going to take you guys seriously." Naruto then flashed a mischievous grin. A grin at which Mina imperceptibly shivers at. The last time Naruto gave a grin like that was when Naruto went on his prolonged prank spree on the members of the highly respected brass. None were spared. So if they truly doubt our power dash. At this the shinobis all cowered and shook their heads furiously, wide-eyed. If the Max system was overpowered versus planet-sized ships and nuclear missiles in great abundance on the Guardian, making enemies of them was the last thing on anyone's mind, then we should have a test of sorts. Naruto grinned while members of the 501st looked olishly at him. "I will be participating against any number of any shinobi they put up against me and one other, so they do not believe that it was a fluke, or that I was conspiring with anyone as a former member of Konohagakure's military forces. Any volunteers, ladies?" Immediately, everyone from the 501st proudly stepped up. Feet first into hell, indeed. "Girls, I will take this challenge." Mina then spoke up. The shinobis looked at her condescendingly, pointedly forgetting the fact she was the one who first reacted and pointed a weapon at their leader. A weapon that would have killed him within a blink of the eye. Minato then nodded. "Agreed. So I'll inform the council. Can the rest of you escort our guests here to the best hotel we have?" Everyone nodded and got underway. A round of headaches all around ensured that night, all for various reasons. How the fuck did it come to this? Random training field. Konohagakure. 7:45 a.m. The members of the 501st stood off to one side with Mina, while Naruto stood in the middle, eagerly awaiting his match. He hadn't had a good fight in a while. He stood in armor, sans helmet, which Mina was holding for him. He had disarmed himself except for his LPT-45 personal sidearm on his right hip, in Hostler. The L designation on a weapon stood for linear. The linear system was similar to the Max system and Gauss weapon types. It had a magnetic system propelling a projectile at hypersonic speeds, able to penetrate, even TFN tank armor, which was reportedly known to have protection equivalent to 1,000 millimeters of protection against kinetic forces or projectiles. Thanks to the harder-hitting power of the linear system, the bullets could be afforded to be smaller, while retaining their power. The bullets were a manufactured self-sharpening tungsten, which, even under harsh environment and pressure, penetrated most armors and sent the rest of the bullets still there, ricocheting back at the intended target. This was also semi-effective against shields, though it could engage shielded enemies with a high kill probability factor. Despite the linear system still having the same flaws as every other projectile launcher system it preceded, the need for ammunition, it balances this out with help from ships or factories. Most ships have the capacity to produce munitions for all types, including its own ammunition. The Super Destroyer Guardian was no stranger to this. In fact, the Super Destroyer is a one-of-a-kind ship. It was a jack of all trades. It combined the armor, firepower, and shielding systems on board a heavy cruiser. Possessed the numbers of land personnel, armor, and space planes to be its own carrier, along with its own environmental system to resupply itself with the reactor to produce crops. Finally, it had the same engine power as a light cruiser, and stealth technology with a prowler, during the Human Covenant War. Of course there are drawbacks, but the main point is that the Guardian could and would sustain itself, even in this environment. So he could fire all the ammunition that he has on him, and could requisition a munitions drop from the Guardian. Life was good. The council finally appears, on time, and moves to stand with the observing Jounin, which all shinobi ranked Chunin or higher have been notified of the situation. Needless to say, everyone had their doubts on this. Naruto Uzumaki, it is the decision of this council to proceed with the test to find out if your story that we gathered is true or not. Under the power of the council, we ask you to fight our Hokage, Namikaze Minato, and his wife, Uzumaki Kushina. There is to be no killing blow, and the fight will last until one party surrenders. Do you accept these terms as we decree it? Proclaims one of the Hokage's advisors, Hamura. Despite him being an advisor for the Saname Hokage, it seemed it was a position to be passed from one to another, like the Hokages themselves. Naruto inwardly snorts at this. He is tempted to scoff at him for believing he held so much power, but settles down and nods wordlessly. Minato and Kushina step up, donned in their own battle gear. Minato, his shinobi attire consisting of a modest Konoha Jounin flak jacket. Kushina had her ANBU attire, minus the mask in respect to Naruto's decision to forego his helmet. The three participants get into a ready stance with everyone watching in anticipation. Except for the 501st and Mina. They watched calculatingly, in order to gauge the strength of the strongest village's strongest shinobi. From there, they could assess the average strength of the population that resided on this planet. Mina, despite having witnessed his powers firsthand, was still worried for Naruto. She didn't know what it was like to go up against your deceased parents, but she knew it was anything but sunshine and petals. Minato and Kushina were worried for Naruto as well, but decided to shoot first, ask later as it were. They slowly smothered their emotions, and waited for the battle to commence. Naruto was thinking of how much he could change in this timeline. He then realized that he hadn't met his counterpart yet. A female in this reality. Weird. He shook his head out of the disconcerting thoughts, and, making a mental note to get his parents to introduce him into her life, readied himself for battle. As a random shinobi stepped out onto the field to start it, he pulled out his pistol in a non-threatening manner. I would just like to say that this here weapon has the capacity to do one of three things with one shot: kill you, maim you, or hurt like a bitch. Since I would also like to remind everyone here that I hold no hard feelings towards anyone and wouldn't like someone who isn't involved with making my life hell to be killed anytime soon. When I aim this at anyone here, including you two, I am aiming to incapacitate or parry a weapon, not kill. So if I aim this at you, take the safe route and dodge. Not like anyone there could anyways. Everyone did tense temporarily at this as he reupholstered his weapon. For ninja appear at each corner of the battlefield to use a barrier technique. Hajime. Begin/start. Yelled out the random, shaken shinobi. He promptly used the Shunshin no Jutsu, to put it blandly, in order to get the fuck out of there. Minato took out his signature three-pronged kunai and threw at Naruto, while readying another one. Kushina went through hand seals. Naruto stood there. Everyone became dumbfounded, as the kunai suddenly stopped midair, halfway towards its intended target. Though the reason as to why quickly became clear. Naruto, using the seals Minato himself created, flashed over to the kunai before Minato himself did. Grabbing onto it, while still in the same position, one hand stretched out at the kunai, he said ominously. You think I hadn't learned that technique, father? Raising his head, Naruto proceeded to perform a sealless execution of the Uchiha's famed fire release, Great Fireball technique. With considerably more strength than normal. Kushina, resuming her own set of hand seals, proceeded to fire off an enhanced water release, Violent Water Wave. Spiting out an enormous amount of water, it proceeded to douse the flames that the fireball consisted of. Minato, regaining his composure, and realizing he could not utilize his famous Flying Thunder God technique, proceeds to close in on Naruto, trusting that Kushina will cover him. Kushina, realizing the intent of her husband, makes ready another set of seals. Naruto, taking into account their strengths and weaknesses so far, decides to close in on Minato, in order to remain too close with him so that Kushina couldn't properly use many techniques without inflicting some damage on her own husband. Naruto and Minato proceeds to engage in a high-speed hand-to-hand combat. Kushina abandons her earlier plan and proceeds to close the distance. In the taijutsu, or hand-to-hand combat that Naruto and Minato were participating in, Naruto had a distinct advantage. Though Minato had very fast reflexes and was fast even without the use of the Flying Thunder God technique, Naruto was using basic and advanced parts of marine hand-to-hand combat, while also familiar with the way Minato used his own fighting style. Minato himself wasn't familiar in the slightest with the fighting style Naruto was using, and so took a few solid hits. Naruto, feinting a right hook, proceeded to sweep kick Minato, which he promptly dodged by jumping. Naruto, trying to take advantage of his temporary inability to dodge while in midair, took a direct hit from Kushina's palm strike. Naruto staggered and fell back to his starting position near the other end of the field. He felt sluggish and slightly restricted, and quickly realized what was going on. On his armor, a few intricate seals made themselves known by glowing slightly, then disappearing within the armor, seemingly blending themselves within the composite rigid armor. Naruto growled under his breath and looked towards a smug-looking Minato and Kushina. He had to give them that their teamwork and execution was flawless. Though of course, someone's best may still not be enough to best another. Quickly swiping a few seals in order to combat the gravity and restriction seals, he applied it to his armor. A few seals overlapping in the right places can easily remove almost any type of seal. Studying random things as his pastime turned out to be beneficial for once. Minato and Kushina watched with abject horror as Naruto made mincemeat out of Kushina's superior Uzumaki Fuinjutsus or Uzumaki sealing techniques. They had hoped the gravity seals would last long enough to give them a breather. Then, they were caught unprepared as Naruto quickly ran to their position, with pure speed. In mostly full combat armor, Naruto threw a left hook at Minato, knowing he was going to deflect it if he had aimed at Kushina either way. Dodging a quickly timed uppercut from Kushina and a sweep kick from Minato, who also used it as an evasive maneuver from the right hook, Naruto then proceeded to jump slightly backwards to allow the uppercut to almost graze his armor, and then brutality stomped on Minato's protruding leg. With at least a couple tons of weight due to the armor that he was currently wearing, Minato yelled out in pure pain as his kneecaps were reduced to mush. Naruto proceeded to backhand an unprepared Kushina as she was startled by Minato's cry of pain. Luckily, it was straight on the chest armor of the ambu plate. Unfortunately, it was bended inwards at an angle enough to knock her out with extreme internal injuries. Naruto took some guilty pleasure in causing some form of damage to the one who sealed the demon fox inside him to start a chain of events leading to his suffering. But he was entirely guilty of causing pain to his mother, who did nothing to harm his person and even helped him despite being dead, through the seal, way back then. Minato, watching this in outrage, decides to quickly form an enhanced Rasengan with one hand at an seemingly unfocused Naruto. Naruto countered with a wind release, Rasen Shuriken at extremely close range. It completely overtook the vastly underpowered, in comparison, Rasengan and continued on to shred Minato's right arm, which was the arm that was about to deliver the Rasengan. Passing out from a combination of shock and pain, he was quickly declared the winner, as the surrounding shinobi quickly called up for medic needs. Naruto simply shook his head mirthfully and called up Warrant Officer Mayafuji Yoshika, who was already prepared by Naruto's earlier warning before the battle. She had extensively trained in the use of mana in order to apply it in a healing manner. She already had an enormous reserve of pure mana, which Naruto immediately detected, and so she trained with everyone else in controlling it every day, quickly repairing all damage to Minato's arm and leg and regrowing it to enable full use. She then moved on to Kushina, who had flown straight into a tree, by the sheer force of Naruto's backhand, and took off her severely damaged armor and proceeded to repair all the damage, paying special care to the massive internal damage. In a matter of a few minutes, the strongest pair of shinobi that Konoha had to offer were reduced to a near-death state. In a matter of a few minutes, many opinions of Naruto and his group were changed. And in a matter of 30 seconds the same aforementioned pair were back up to full strength, except for being unconscious. Details. Yoshika, upon completing her job, moved back to the rest of her squad slightly winded, with Naruto graciously carrying both of his opponents to a nearby tree, the one near the tree Kushina had flown into, and setting them down with their backs resting against the side of it, he proceeded to flop onto the ground, conveniently next to Kushina, and inclined his head. Minna took this as a sign to go ahead and stepped out onto the field as well, giving her own helmet to her longtime friend Lieutenant Colonel Sakamoto Mio, and giving Naruto's own to him on her way there. She awaits her own match. Considerably cowed, the next set of opponents, the Sannin of Konoha, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru, stepped up nervously but without hesitation. Everyone is sufficiently muted by the completely domination that Naruto exhibited that match. It was enough to say it was more of a one-sided massacre than a fight, as the pair had not landed a single serious blow. The same random, and by now terrified, shinobi pops up again and begins the fight, the barrier appearing again, having come down after the Naruto was declared winner to allow medic needs in. Hajime. It was a tense atmosphere in that unlucky, random training field in Konoha. The side with the shinobi, unofficially named the ninja side by Naruto's group, was struck with awe and fear up against Naruto's power. One could tell they were desperately hoping against all odds that his subordinates were much weaker. Those poor, deluded fools. Naruto was relaxing his tension from his recent battle against his parents. He held no qualms about holding back during a mutually agreed spar/fight/training session or whatnot. Luckily, he had Warrant Officer Mayafuji Yoshika around as a great medic. He mused over the situation as he idly played with Kushina's red hair. Both Minato and Kushina were still recovering from their battle. Their bodies are fine as of currently, but their minds needed to play catch-up. He mentally went over the Guardian's crew roster. Mayafuji definitely deserved that full promotion to lieutenant later on. He also went over the ship's status with the aid of Tsukuyomi. Sir? We're going to need a proper base of operations if we're planning on letting some of the crew go shoreside. Tsukuyomi spoke to him through his suit. He agreed with that statement. Having one permanent base in the major villages, or even within their lands, would show preferential treatment, and he had no desire to mess up any of this timeline with another war wave before it was due. He still needed Madara to be confined to Rain, for now. He looked at Kushina, as she groaned in contentment when he started to stroke her hair. His eyes widened in realization as he had an epiphany. He relayed orders through Tsukuyomi, and his suit back to the Guardian. Things were about to get real busy. Really busy. He thought, amused, as the random shinobi commenced a match against the Densetsu no Sannin or legendary 3 ninjas. Starting things up, Minna yelled out, "Weapon requisition!" A shine of blue-white light started to shine on Minna's right hand, extending past it and forming a familiar L shape. Becoming solid, Minna raised the weapon to shoulder level. It was a linear machine gun, Type 42 or LMGT-42 for short. The entire process took less than 4 seconds. After the Human Covenant War, both the newly renamed TFN and the newly created ERN were making many advances in technologies and armaments. One of the main issues was field munitions. A soldier had to carry his own weight in ammunition, weapons, gadgets, armor, and the like. This meant more time carrying, and less time shooting. One brilliant female scientist, named Naruko Arashur, had proposed the use of slip space to store any amount of munitions. Using the suit's onboard reactor as the catalyst, a soldier would equip his/herself with a slip space fanny pack in order to carry gear, munitions, rations, and special equipment. It quickly was approved and entered mass production. Reactors quickly became the most popular use in powered armoring. Ships in the Navy were quick to catch up and created their own version called slip space chambers by their own sheer size. Since the slip space dimension was relative to the reactor's maximum power output, a soldier wearing standard combat armor had access to approximately 80 tons worth of gear. However, the unit equipped with the reactor could not call upon something that could be utilized in a precinct manner, namely vehicles or aircraft. The calling out of weapons requisition is taught in standard training as a way to show proper identity and protocol while using it to prevent a Big Brother scenario by captured or stolen reactors. The neural interface implanted in every serviceman would also use this as a means to IFF or identify friend or foe. Minna, taking advantage of her opponent's momentary confusion and bewilderment, called out upon her mana. Manipulating it to a heat, she fired off a few fireballs in their direction. The Sannin were shaken out of their stupor by this and quickly jumped out of their way. The purposely underpowered fireballs impacted the barrier surrounding the battlefield harmlessly. For just about every species, life energy is relegated to chakra, composed of its own components, mana and chi. For humans, males are inherently stronger physically due to their build and lack of numerous weak points that a female naturally possess. Since then, males naturally have more chi, the physical component of chakra, and are easier to manipulate and maintain than females. On the other side of the coin, females have a different hormonal structure and brain pattern. Over a long line of evolution from the simple mind, females adapted to conflicts by utilizing both halves of their brains, something which males are inherently unable to do well. Because of this, mana for females are easier to control and train. Minna, utilizing both her suit's power, her naturally large mana reserves, and her own neural augments, quickly reacted to Jiraiya's attempt to close in with hand-to-hand combat. Firing off a fire bullets in order for him to disengage, Minna was forced to dodge an overhead swing from Tsunade, who was not far behind Jiraiya. Able to manipulate her mana in order to counteract the shock wave caused by Tsunade's usage of her impeccable chakra control, she was then forced to dodge a fire release, dragon fire technique from Orochimaru. Quickly recalling her machine gun back into her slip space pack, she pulled out her personal sidearm and fired a precise shot right into Orochimaru's arm, who then melted into mud, revealing it to be a mud clone. Unleashing a furious battle cry, Tsunade punched the ground with an enormous amount of chakra in an asynchronous manner to devastate the earth. Minna, forced to give up more ground, is pinned by the opposite direction by Jiraiya's own Wild Lion's main technique. Minna, backed into a corner by several unusual techniques, initiated one of her suit's abilities, jetpack. Flying into the air, with the propulsion system aided by her suit's extremely efficient reactor, Minna suddenly turned the tables on the awestruck, yet again, group of shinobis. With unlimited airtime, Minna proceeded to fire a number of mana-based attacks at the Sannin. The Sannin were about to perform a counterattack when they quickly took a double take at Minna's new appearance. Or rather, new appendages. She had two new, White Wolf ears. Back again at the TFN, they had experimented with new and safer augments. With the discovery of mana and chi, augments closely followed. It was easy enough to augment a soldier to a marine standard, but the special forces called for a special augment to improve the usage and maintaining of chi and or mana. A spiritual familiar was used. A traditional way of inducing natural energy only heard in folklore, it combined chi and or mana into an animal that best represented the amount of energy used. It is known that a particular species of animals were inherited. Thus, new classes of nobility were born once more. The augments in this, therefore, were only given to servicemen of the orbital drop shock troopers of the Marines, the Spartans of the Navy, and the Delta Force of the Army, as well as mandatory augments for officers of the 7th rank or up who wished to remain in combat. The helmet portion of the battle armors usually covered this up, with extra back torso space for the tail. These appendages only come out into the open with the using of chi-based or mana-based attacks, with the augments reacting to help increase its power and control. Think of it as a storage boost enhancer, like additional adrenaline. But for magical or spiritual energy. Except now, the build-up releases into enhanced control and easier to maintain, as compared to enhanced perception and a desperate boost of energy to survive. With the augments, it comes into play more often than simply the will to survive when facing a life/death situation. The way to properly discharge this extra boost of energy would be to expel it completely from the system before it becomes overloaded with energy. However, with mana and chi, their energy are more solid and complex than a simple hormonal discharging. So much so in fact that only another independent and symbiotic organism with control necessary to do such would be needed. Hence in spiritual familiar, every familiar is different and unique according to one person. It is known to inherit the same family of familiars from one person, hence nobility. Familiars are special to one family, and therefore awarded a place in the social hierarchy. The Sannin made a fatal mistake in taking the time to analyze Minna's new furry ears on top of her head. Minna detached a C-74A2G-C6 grenade, commonly known as the shell grenade, for its explosion on par with an artillery shell. This grenade also has several different variants, but all carry the same defense feature. Retractable spikes. Like the spikes on a brute spike grenade, they can stick to any surface desired, but an electronic signal can be given before arming in order to let the grenade bounce like a common pineapple frag grenade. With a proximity detector, the grenade can detect motion around it. Sending a quick electromagnetic pulse, it can detect shields in its proximity. All shields give off a unique energy signature. Therefore, Loyalist Covenant shields, ERN or TFN shields are different from one another. If the grenade detects no shields within its blast radius, it detonates. If there is a TFN or ERN shield within range, it acts a proximity mine, and can be detonated remotely or when an enemy comes within range and there is no allies in the area. If it detects that the grenade itself is being picked up by hostile forces with no shields or loyalist shields, it deploys its spike to stick to the opponent. If an ally has his/her shields depleted, the energy residue is still detected by the grenade, further reducing the chance for friendly fire. The Sannin quickly dive out of the way as the grenade detonates. The explosion sends them in different directions. The three legendary ninja of Konoha realize that at the way things are going, they won't be able to bring the rear admiral down. All three of them look at each other, and give them an unspoken signal. They draw their own blood and begin a set of hand signs with practiced ease. They yell out to the ninja maintaining the protective barrier technique around the battlefield to drop the barrier. Summoning technique. 3 large columns of smoke appear. To the airborne Minna, it seems as if the gray clouds of smoke seemed to smother the green lands before them. Things were about to get messy. Kushina abruptly woke up to the sounds of a familiar summoning technique sequence. Was their battle already over? Her first instinct was to check her own body for injuries. She ran a hand lazily over her chest and found out her ANBU issue was gone. There was also a tear in the purple underarmor, but no apparent injury. She then remembered Minato's shriek of pain and turned to look for him, only to find him also waking out of his daze with no injuries as well, as if it never happened. Kushina, though confusedly. She knew none of the medics in Konoha barring Tsunade had the control and skill to reverse damage, only counter it. Even then, Tsunade could only do that on herself. She was snapped out of her musings, as well as Minato's, when she heard chuckling from her left side. Naruto watched their confused interactions with an amusing stare and decided to take pity on them. You guys were heavily wounded, on the verge of death. I had let the 501st Squad's medic heal you back to full strength. It was your loss, he explained. It's also my subordinate's turn against Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru. Minato then smiled. Since they all summoned their bosses, your subordinate doesn't stand much of a chance. Naruto smirked back at him. Oh? Then why were they pressured to summon them in the first place? Minato was about to retort when they suddenly heard Gamabunta's loud, imposing voice bear down on everyone. Jiraiya! You lazy, good-for-nothing asshole! Why have you summoned me now? Jiraiya rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry, old toad. We'll be needing you, and your associate's assistance for this battle. It's only a test, but we've underestimated her abilities. Her? Ha! Figures you aging meatbags couldn't handle a girl. Insert malicious laughter from Manda, the snake boss here. Do not worry about their ill-advised manner of speaking. We will help. All of us. Katsuya, the female slug boss, intoned quite warningly at both Manda and Gamabunta, who then both promptly proceeded to shut up. So, who exactly are you fighting, and why did you piss her off? Gamabunta inquired, to the chagrin of Jiraiya, the rest of the Sannin, and well, just about everyone else. Jiraiya pointed to Minna, who was still lazily circling above in the sky, observing the new threats. Just don't underestimate her. The summoned animal bosses were confused. Jiraiya. Wouldn't that be overkill? I won't dash. Gamabunta would have continued to show his protest in a gross misapplication of force, if Minna hadn't decided to bulldoze her way through all 3 bosses with a mana shield to force them on their backs. Though Katsuya had taken Jiraiya's warnings to heart, and proceeded to melt into tiny slugs, avoiding the attack, and reform at the other two's location. Everyone from the ninja side were dumbfounded. Everyone from the TFN side were looking on with pride. All 6, the Sannin bosses, became serious and decided to counterattack. They were about to release a magnitude of long-range techniques when multiple firebombs, courtesy of Minna, slammed into them with the force of a semi-truck at full speed. Calling out another weapon requisition, Minna revealed her trusted LMG and fired off a few recalibrated hollow points at the summons, knocking them further back with harmless projectiles filled with force, strong enough to daze even beings of their size. Minna was then forced to pull back into the sky when the large frog and Jiraiya pulled off a combination technique, fire release, toad oil flame bullet. Taking advantage of Minna's loss in momentum, Katsuya and Manda proceeded to fire off their own long-range techniques. It quickly turned from covering fire to suppressive fire. Minna, dodging some, and firing a few fireballs to counter some of the unavoidable one, decided to close in for the kill. She quickly and expertly manipulated the mana within her body to her hands and arms. Minna flew in fast and low, dodging the furious amounts of attacks with ease, and leaving a trail of craters and smoke. She then flew in a vertical 90-degree angle just in front of the 3 bosses, with Jiraiya and Gamabunta in the middle. Grabbing Gamabunta's garb, she continued to flew at the same angle. The jet pack relentlessly maintaining its output and power. Now everyone was watching in either anticipation or denial as a huge frog was being lifted into the air by a person many times smaller. Trudging on, Minna kept hauling her unbelievably heavy load into the sky. The air was getting progressively thinner, and since Gamabunta was huge, required more air to remain conscious, it did not take long for him to pass out at an altitude of 25,000 feet above sea level. She decided to cut it short and bring herself ground-side. Utilizing a supersized seismic toss, she threw Gamabunta, with Jiraiya still hanging on with chakra for his very life at both the giant slug and giant snake. They were both caught with their pants down as they were still in awe of her immensely unbelievable feat. They were slammed by the weight and force of their associate without a counter. They were promptly dispelled, while Minna flew into the rapidly disappearing smoke caused by both the impact and the dispelling of the summons. Tsunade was the first to regain her senses and groggily picked herself up to look for Jiraiya and Orochimaru, who were both in an uncompromising position. Blackmail. She then found a cold barrel at the base of her neck and spinal column. Tsunade froze and looked at Jiraiya and Orochimaru for assistance. Jiraiya and Orochimaru both nodded at her. She nodded back. Suddenly Minna found herself with a kunai, a longsword, and a Rasengan threatening her vitals. Surrender. Now. They ordered her. The other 3 in front of Minna disappeared with different variations. Clones. Suddenly, Tsunade and Orochimaru, who were at equal level with their weapons, had a weapon pressed against Tsunade, with the barrel pointed at both. Jiraiya had another weapon pointed at his face. Surrendering now would be much less painful for all of you. Minna intoned quite cheerfully. A stark contrast of what she was threatening to do. They watched in shock as the other Minna they were aimed at vanished in a hazy electrical blue with particles. Or rather pixels. Hologram. They were frozen in fear. They decided to surrender in order to end the fight. She proved to be a very competent fighter to stand against them with their bosses and with a severe numbers disadvantage. Naruto decided to speak up, as if knowing everyone's thoughts. Actually, out of this group, Minna is the least combat adept out of all of us. Everyone shockingly turning to Minna as if to confirm this, only to be further disheartened when she cheerfully smiled at Naruto in order to confirm it. Naruto had given his squad some free time in Konoha. He was busy setting up directives for the base of operations for the Guardian. He also seen the situations outside the 5 major villages and decided to familiarize his squad with some experience later on. Yet, despite this amount of thinking, which would have undoubtedly either frightened or amused some people back in Konoha, he moved with a purpose. Finally seeing his objective, he strode over to them and spoke in a polite tone. "May I see your daughter Kasumi?" Minato and Kushina solemnly nodded, knowing this would be something that meant a good deal to him. Seeing what a good life, as opposed to his rather harsh and unjustified life back on his reality. On their way there, Naruto inquired. "Oh, and could you tell me a little more about the ruins of what used to be Yuzugakure, the village hidden in the whirlpool?" "Former Yuzugakure." 3 years post-incident 314 HG3 aka Slip Space Hole Transition. Whirlpool Fortress. Command Room. Elevation 100 meters below sea level. It was 3 years after making contact with Konoha. It seemed as if everyone else knew them now as celebrities. Proud and loyal soldiers of the TFN taking jobs and getting acquainted with the lifestyle of a ninja world. With tensions on the rise, Naruto decided to make his base of operations on the former ruins which once made up Yuzugakure, or the village hidden in the whirlpools. Having been destroyed in the aftermath of the IWA Kumo joint attack, Naruto, as commanding officer, made this base on neutral grounds. Building the base took a great deal of effort, as the military installation would have to be underground since above sea level was too small for a main base. Civilians came and went as they pleased on the surface, trading and selling for economic needs of both parties. The main installation, however, was underground and hidden from all outsiders. With intense and technologically advanced scanners, no shinobi or kunoichi was able to infiltrate the ever-mysterious Whirlpool Fortress, named in honor of village and place in which it built on. IWA and Kumo were getting restless recently. With the advent of the TFN and its rebuilding of Yuzu, both nations have started remilitarizing their armies. In counter, Konoha and Suna have begun their own remilitarization, but are no way near the amount of forces needed to counter the huge armies of the already large military that was comprised of IWA and Kumo. With this, Fortress Whirlpool, as well as the Guardian, start mobilizing their own forces as a deterrence. Pulling back all their forces, or otherwise known as cutting off diplomatic ties, Naruto's goal was to nip the growing sense of bloodlust of the other nations while it was still in the bud. It had worked, but for only a little while. Kiri, after a long recovery of their civil war, aided by TFN soldiers and most notably Naruto himself, offered full military and economic assistance to the TFN. This was the proverbial spark that set off the powder keg, and IWA and Kumo immediately launched an attack on both Suna and Konoha. Their plan was to draw out TFN forces onto the mainland, instead of being forced to fight on their home territory. Konoha and Suna, both knowing they had no way to fight off the two greater military powers, called for aid from both Kiri and the TFN. Kiri reluctantly joined on the side of Konoha and Suna, but were only able to stop seaborne invasions and sea trade of IWA and Kumo. Having little to no shinobi forces available, the best they could have done was supply their allies, though the new Godame Mizukage, Mei Terumi, was at best frustrated over this fact. Now Naruto, as leader of the TFN stationed on this world, was pressured to join by Kiri, Konoha, and Suna's side. Naruto took a long, deep breath. One that was full of weariness. One could tell that he was fed up with the arrogance and shortcomings of the human race. The staff around him, as well as the battle-hardened 501st ODST squad, looked at him in concern. Brushing this off, he knew it was mostly his fault that tensions rose so quickly, but war was inevitable. Humans could never escape from it, whether because of their own kin, or from external threats. War was like a virus. The more you tried to suppress it, the harder it fought to get out. It always got out. Sighing once more, as if trying to brace himself for what he was about to do, he spoke to the communications officer. Alert the soldiers. We're going to DEFCON 1. Prepare all airborne units for transport and low-level air support. I want the army ready in no less than an hour. Sir. At once controlled chaos erupted in the command room. As if roused, the people inside the room full of computer displays started to move with a purpose. The 501st themselves saluted Naruto, before making their way outside, supposedly readying themselves. Fleet Admiral, sir. The Guardian has acknowledged our request, and is requesting coordinates for a rally point. Where should they go? Spoke a navigational officer. He turned to Naruto after having said this, waiting for his input. Naruto remembered a scene like this back on Earth, his Earth. Back in the UNSC, with his trusted friend's daughter, Miranda Keyes. He read a transmission from her base near New Mombasa while her was trying to fly back into Earth's atmosphere in order to suppress the alien invasion fleet. Naruto loaded his pistol that he kept with him at all times and made his way out of the room himself, but not before leaving 2 words that would inspire all the soldiers under his command, especially since the intercom was left on. To war. The skies over the seas between Fortress Whirlpool and Konoha suddenly were dotted by scores of transport gunships. Both Pelicans and Falcons made their way inland in order to support Konoha and Suna from the fierce attack by IWA and Kumo. Despite the Pelican having established itself as the workhorse of both the UNSC and the TFN, it had less capability in atmosphere, where it was working most of the time. With a lack of suppressive weapons in order to soften the ground for its payload to land safely, the UH-144 Falcon usually worked in tandem to take over the Pelican's role as a support gunship. Armed with either LHMG-247 machine guns or LM-460 AGL grenade launchers, and with a front-mounted LCM-638 autocannon, it could dish out a surprising amount of firepower, and was flexible with the ability to unload up to 3 passengers. Naruto, alongside a squad of Marines belonging to Bravo Company of the 51st Marine Battalion, went over the complete military intelligence gathered by the combined efforts of Fortress Whirlpool and the Guardian. IWA and Kumo were already militarized long before the Fourth Great Shinobi War started. In doing so, IWA had around 10 battalions worth of men. Kumo had around 7 battalions themselves. IWA and Kumo both had 3 battalions on defense. That left around 11 battalions freed up to attack. 5 IWA battalions were currently engaged with the Konoha-Suna Joint Forces. 3 more Kumo battalions were sweeping in from the upper left column and were intending to flank their forces. If the Konoha-Suna forces were to engage the Kumo battalion, they would be spread out too far and would not win either fronts. If they left the Kumo attack unchallenged, then they would left their villages defenseless. In order to counter this, they were supposed to send in their Jinchuriki, Gaara and Kasumi, in order to take out, or even just suppress their efforts. In another brilliant counter, Kumo sent one of their Jinchuriki, Kurabi, to keep them busy. There was worth in mentioning that IWA had 2 battalions and Kumo had 1 more in reserve. The reserve forces of 3 battalions were to observe the carnage from afar and to step in when necessary. Each battalion had around 1,000 shinobi and kunoichi in it. Konoha and Suna had around 3 battalions to match up to Iwa's 5 and had 1 support battalion to help. They had 2 reserves and were just barely hanging on with just Iwa's central attack force. Therefore, the TFN's game plan was to land the main attack force of 2 marine battalions and an armored platoon, the only one that the Guardian possessed. The platoon consisted of 50 vehicles varying from the Tiger MBT or main battle tank, the Groundhog AFV/APC or armored fighting vehicle/armored personnel carrier, the Avalanche large assault gun, and finally the tried and true M12 Warthog FAV or force application vehicle. The Marines were to land in a position behind the 3 reserve battalions. From there, the vehicles would be deployed and the Marines were to be rear guard for the tanks and AFVs to make the spearhead. The Warthogs would be used on scouting missions for the Avalanche artillery pieces. Naruto flicked on the TACCOM to a general frequency. Soldiers of the Terran Federation Navy. I am proud to have trained each and every one of you personally. I know it is a hard and trying situation. Away from your friends, your families, and even your own worlds. We fight in the interests on humanity. Even when humanity decides to fight itself. But know this. In the end, we fight because we must. It is our duty. Everlasting and demanding. By now everyone listened with rapt attention. We fight for a new world, a world of peace away from it all. Until the day we can return back to our lands. Soldiers of the TFN, I would not trade you for any army or fleet of millions. Because I know just how good you all are. Show us your tenacity. Show me, your leader, your bravery. And show them, allies, neutrals, and enemies alike, just how badass we are. All the military personnel of the TFN by now we cheering like madmen. If he had asked them to go out into the last edges of the universe itself, they would have done it with a smile on their faces. The first wave of the Gohard 51st Marine Battalion and the unrelenting fire 79th Marine Battalion landed. Landing feet first, he proceeded to take cover in a few bushes. The open field had very little cover aside from the occasional large patches of bushes. The Falcons and Pelicans, upon releasing their occupants, proceeded to unleash all of its payload into the unsuspecting Kumo and IWA shinobis. Caught off guard, the few that were left standing from the barrage of missiles, bullets, and grenade launchers turned around only to be met with the screaming missiles of the Super Sabre ASSF, Air/Space Superiority Fighter, and the 20-ton payloads of the Longsword II bombers. The next in wave of infantry having landed, the 51st and 79th proceeded to mop up the survivors, what little had survived by pure luck. In the first opening move of the TFN, 3,000 men and women of the aggressive IWA and Kumo were wiped off the face of the earth. Naruto reloaded and looked over the impromptu defensive line set up. He noticed that there were no casualties as of yet. They had to hold out from the inevitable counterattack while waiting for the rest of the force to be deployed. Securing a beachhead of sorts, the Marines held fast and secured the position for the armored platoon to be dropped, along with the last wave of infantry. By now the Konoha-Suna joint forces were hanging on by a thread. The main attack force of IWA and Kumo saw this and prepared a retaliatory strike on the TFN soldiers behind them. Around 1,500 soldiers were to hold fast against around 8,000 shinobis. With the long-range ninjutsu specialists closer to the TFN, they fired off some earth and lightning-orientated techniques at the Marines. Shields resisting, they fought back hard and the shinobis paid the price with hundreds more dead in the first two salvos of air support and ground infantry. By now, the air superiority had begun to wane. Fighters and bombers now had more fuel than ammo and returned back to either Whirlpool Fortress or the Guardian to refit and rearm. Naruto took cover in a foxhole made by the numerous destructive techniques the shinobis were throwing at them. He got a confirmation message from the ops center on board the Guardian and smiled. Phase Bravo, now! We're bringing in the cavalry. Suddenly, the defensive line the TFN made began to fall apart into cluttered sections with gaps between sections. The shinobi tried to take advantage of their seemingly chaotic collapse of a defensive line, only to be run down by warthogs, who were hauling ass with their LM-41 LAG. The pure speed of the force application vehicle, combined with the strength of an energy shield, gave it sufficient power for the chaos it was designed to inflict. With bullets scattering in the air and bodies flying from the force of the speed 78 miles per hour can inflict, the main attack force was quickly degenerating into a madhouse. Several enemy commanders tried to get a hold of their troops by bypassing the meager Konoha defenses and into the village for protection with varying results. Some were successful while others were immediately sniped down by the marksmen of the Marines. Suddenly things took a turn for the worst as IWA and Kumo devoted all but one of their battalions from guarding their villages and to catch the TFN soldiers from their behind. It seemed that a commander of the enemy forces was able to send a short-length radio transmission back to either IWA or Kumo. Suddenly, those same 4,000 men and women, advancing upon the TFN flank, ran into a hailstorm of large-caliber weapons, throwing dirt and limbs into the air. Tigers and avalanches were stopping the reinforcements cold. The groundhogs invaded the village of Konoha that was already invaded and dropped off its payload before proceeding to slaughter any shinobi thinking they could get a close combat advantage in an urban situation. Together with the remnants of the Konoha defenses and Suna reinforcements, the TFN marched into the heart of the city near the Hokage Tower and the Chunin Exam Stadium. Naruto, advancing with his fellow Marines, had gotten word that the Yondaime and Sandaime Hokages were facing off against the Tsuchikage and the Reikage. Behind the 4 incoming battalions of IWA and Kumo reinforcements, dismounting from their Pelican, the 501st ODST proceeded to bring general havoc to the enemy. Their orders were to pierce straight through their lines into Konoha and meet up with the 51st and 79th Marine battalions. The Tiger tanks, along with the Avalanche as support, would then advance through their position and end any resistance. Another Pelican dropped off a single soldier. Wearing Mark X Mjolnir armor like Rear Admiral Minna, was a Spartan V Commando. With the new and safer augments, more and more Spartans were trained and deployed. Spartan 4 was the program for any soldier above the age of 18 to be enlisted into the Spartan program. Much like what the Spartan 3 program was intended to do. The newer Spartan V program was to be a continuation of the Spartan 2 program. The elite of the elite Spartan Versus were elevated to near mythical status, much like their predecessors the Spartan 2. This Spartan's mission was to prevent any fleeing shinobis from making it back to either Kumo or IWA, whether it be by arresting or executing them. She was to give them only one chance of surrendering before she was cleared to fire. The 501st and the Spartan nodding their heads in respect, they set off to perform their missions. The now battered shinobi reinforcements of only 600 men and women either immediately surrendered or were cut down by both sides advancing on them. The battle was going well, with 0 casualties from the TFN side. Naruto, along with the same squad of Marines he flew in with, burst into the stadium. Jumping into the combat zone before any reactions could be made, he fired into a few bodyguards of the Reikage and the Tsuchikage. It seemed as if the Reikage himself wanted another rematch with the Yellow Flash, as they were in the middle of swinging their kunai at each other. As soon as it restarted, it stopped as the great figure of a transformed 8-tailed ox made itself known to the world. He then saw the comparatively smaller figure of a transformed 1-tailed raccoon and a 5-tailed fox perform battle, but they were obviously outperformed by the more experienced 8-tailed Jinchuriki. Naruto turned back only to be met with the sight of one of his soldiers speared by a lance of earth jutting from the ground. It seemed that the Reikage used a lightning technique right before the Tsuchikage finished him off, as the soldiers' shields were still sparking in a futile attempt to recharge. The onboard reactor system was damaged beyond repair. His helmet fell off and he coughed blood. Crimson blood. The same color Naruto was now seeing in rage. Brutally punching the Tsuchikage, he fired his weapon at the Reikage in outrage, who managed to escape using his famous lightning armor, giving him speeds on par with the Yellow Flash himself. Both instinctively knowing the fates of the army with the counter-invasion of the TFN, they proceeded to get out before they were captured or killed by the entire army of the TFN. Naruto instantly went after them in a large burst of power. Firing off a shot into the surprised Reikage, he aimed at the Tsuchikage, who made 2 hand signs before disappearing in a cloud of dust. Naruto lazily fell back to earth using his own jetpack before everyone was startled by the appearance of the 4- and 5-tailed Jinchuriki in their transformed states. The 1-tailed Jinchuriki named Gaara and Kasumi, the 9-tailed Jinchuriki were on the verge of losing consciousness, while the 8-tailed was now just wreaking havoc among the buildings of Konoha. As the 501st squad burst into the stadium, the village was under its greatest attack yet. Making a quick judgment call, he ordered the Spartan to move in closer to the 4-tailed Jinchuriki along with the avalanche batteries to get a targeting solution on the 4-tails. He ordered the 501st to take to the skies into formation with him. As the 12-man formation flew in closer with the 8-tails, Naruto ordered the Guardian to perform a feat, not used since the fall of Reach, a max shot in atmosphere, right on top of the 5-tails. The refitted fighters and bombers were to assist either the bringing down of the 4 or 5-tails. Guns boomed, missiles tore through the sky. And Naruto, well, he kept flying towards the 8-tailed ox demon head-on. Knowing the faces behind in formation with him were either looking at him with surprise or curiosity, he gave the order to fire whatever long-range attack they had at the 8-tails to distract it. Now pushing his reactor to the limits, he flew even faster towards Karabi, the 8-tailed Jinchuriki. Using a good portion of his chakra into his right arm, it brimmed with blue-whitish energy, and even began to damage the armor. He decided to take a page out of his younger self's combat doctrine. Charge in with everything you have and hope everything comes out alright. Seeing the huge transformed purple beast try to swat the 501SD's attacks out of the air, he swung his arm with all of his might, and released the pent-up energy in a cataclysmic explosion. Then, everything was over in an instant. Peace found its way into the war-torn lands, the 1-tailed being treated by Suna medics while Kasumi was treated by Shizen, the 4-tails apprehended while its unconscious jailer slept. The 5-tails, thoroughly knocked out with a watered-down shot from the Mach weapon system. And the 8-tails, coming near death by the great power of an enraged Naruto Uzumaki. The man who, mostly single-handed, took down a beast of great proportions just looked into the blue sky mixed with darkening smoke. Damn it, and it was such a promising week too. The end.